You need to watch this if you crave chills down your spine. Welcome to Soul Studios. Here, true crime meets the unknown. Suspense lurks in every shadow, and supernatural forces whisper from the dark. We craft chilling, edge-of-your-seat short stories inspired by the eerie, the unexplained, and the most haunting mysteries. 3 new stories drop every week, each one darker than the last. Are you ready to step inside? Subscribe now before the next story finds you.
In the aftermath of World War II, a small Polish village struggles to rebuild, but something sinister refuses to stay buried. At the center of it all is a mysterious music box that seems to reappear no matter where it's hidden, carrying with it whispers of tragedy, guilt, and something far darker. This is not just a ghost story, it's a chilling descent into memory, loss, and the heavy shadows of war. What begins as an eerie tale of unexplained events slowly unravels into a haunting mystery that will make you question whether the past ever truly lets go. If you crave cinematic, true account-style horror stories filled with atmosphere, suspense, and unforgettable twists, hit subscribe to Soul Studios, because the next story might just keep you up tonight. In 1947, at dawn on a chilly October day, the villagers of Ruecznika awoke to a terrifying discovery. Lying face up in the ashen ruins of an old cottage was the body of a local man, Karol Wozniak, his eyes wide with unspeakable fear. Clutched in his pale hands was a small wooden music box, its lid hanging open. Some witnesses claimed a faint lullaby could be heard chiming from it in the morning air, though its clockwork had long since wound down. Karol's death was the 3rd mysterious tragedy in Ruecznika that year. It would not be the last. What no one realized, at least not yet, was that all these horrors stemmed from a single cursed war relic that Karol had kept hidden, and the unspeakable secret it carried. Karol Wozniak was a quiet, unassuming man in his early 30s. Before the nightmares began, he was known in the village as a devoted husband, a loving father, and a humble shopkeeper. World War II had scarred Ruecznika, a small town in rural Poland, but Karol and his family seemed to have survived with their lives and home intact. In public, Karol was respected as a man who had endured hardship like everyone else, rebuilding life from the rubble. Yet privately, Karol carried the weight of a wartime sin. Buried deep in his cellar, wrapped in burlap, lay a cache of valuables he had quietly taken amid the chaos of war. One of those items was a beautifully crafted old music box, an innocent-looking keepsake with an ornate brass crank on its side. He had told his wife it was just something he found in the ruins of a bombed house. In truth, it was a plundered treasure from a neighbor's home, a home whose former occupants would never return. Karol wasn't alone in this transgression. In those dark days when Nazi death squads rampaged through Polish villages, some desperate locals scavenged whatever they could. Entire families were there one day and gone the next. Their belongings, clothes, jewelry, furniture, were left behind to be picked over by survivors. It was an ugly reality that no one talked about, but many knew. Karol had been there on that dreadful afternoon in 1942 when the Goldman family, his neighbors for years, were rounded up by Nazi soldiers. The Goldmans, a Jewish couple and their young daughter, had pleaded for mercy that never came. They were led into the woods at gunpoint and never seen alive again. After the gunshots ceased and the trucks moved on, an eerie silence fell over Ruecznika. Under cover of twilight, Karol and a friend, Tomasz, crept into the Goldmans' abandoned cottage. What they found were the intimate remnants of a vanished life: an overturned chair, a half-cooked meal still on the stove, a child's doll lying on the floor. Whether out of greed or simply the instinct to salvage something from horror, Karol pocketed a few valuables, among them a silver pocket watch and that wooden music box decorated with inlaid mother-of-pearl. Tomasz took a pearl necklace and some fine cutlery. They left quickly, hearts pounding, telling themselves they'd done nothing wrong. After all, the owners were gone. In the awful logic of war, unspoken though it was, the belongings of murdered neighbors became spoils for those left behind. For a long time, Karol tried to forget where the music box came from. When the war ended in 1945 and peace on paper returned, Ruecznika struggled to heal. Karol turned the page and focused on providing for his wife, Magda, and their 5-year-old daughter, Anna. He even gifted the little music box to Anna, a pretty trinket to cheer her up when she was sad. Anna loved its gentle lullaby tune and intricate carvings. On quiet nights, the soft tinkling of its melody would float through their cottage as Anna drifted to sleep. To anyone else, it was a tender scene of a father comforting his child. But to Karol, that melody carried a chill. It was the same tune he'd heard faintly playing in the Goldman's house when he and Tomasz entered to loot it years before. The lullaby must have been mid-song when its owner was taken away. Each note reminded Karol of a guilt he dared not voice. He never told Anna or Magda that the box once belonged to little Miriam Goldman, the child who'd been taken to the woods. He forced a smile whenever Anna cherished it, even as his stomach lurched with unease. As 1946 rolled on, strange occurrences began to disturb the fragile peace in Ruecznika. It started subtly. Late at night, Karol would awaken to the faint strains of the music box melody echoing down the hallway. Groggy and confused, he would climb out of bed to investigate Anna's room, only to find the music box shut and still on her bedside table. Anna would be fast asleep, the room silent except for her soft breathing. Karol tried to convince himself that the music was in his dream, or perhaps that Anna had been playing it and he caught the tail end. Magda dismissed it as her husband's restless mind. After all, everyone was on edge rebuilding their lives. But Karol couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Each time he heard the phantom lullaby, it was the same tune, always stopping before the final bar, as if someone, or something, didn't want the song to end. Then came the incident with Tomasz, which shattered any illusion of normalcy. One grey afternoon in March 1946, news spread that Tomasz, Karol's friend and partner in that long-ago looting, had been found dead in the river just outside the village. His death shocked everyone. Tomasz was a hardy, seasoned farmer. He knew the local terrain like the back of his hand. Yet there he was, dragged from the frigid waters by fishermen, his face twisted in horror. Villagers whispered that his body bore no signs of struggle or injury, as if he had simply walked into the water and drowned. Even more perplexing, Tomasz's pockets were filled with pebbles and mud. It was almost like he'd scooped up handfuls of earth before he died, grasping at the riverbed. Some of the old women in town crossed themselves and muttered about unsettled spirits. Karol's blood ran cold at the news. He recalled with a sickening clarity where he'd seen pebbles and mud stuffed in pockets before. It was exactly how the Goldmans' bodies were found, half buried in a shallow pit by the riverbank months after their execution. Years later, investigators piecing together wartime atrocities noted that many victims in mass graves were found with soil clutched in their hands, as if scrambling to escape. Karol had not been present when the Goldmans' remains were quietly reinterred by villagers, but he heard descriptions. The realization hit him like a hammer. Tomasz had died in the very manner the Goldmans did. That night, Karol could barely sleep. A terrible guilt gnawed at him. Tomasz had taken the pearl necklace from the Goldmans. Karol still remembered how it glittered in his hands. Could it be a curse? He tried to pray, but found no words. In the silent house, only the ticking of the kitchen clock kept him company. At 3:15 a.m., he awoke from a light doze to a new sound, soft weeping. It was unmistakable, a child's sobbing coming from somewhere inside the walls. Karol sat up, heart thudding. Anna? He checked on his daughter. She was asleep, clutching her rag doll, tears dry on her cheeks. The crying was not coming from her. It seemed to echo from the very structure of the house. He followed the faint cries to the parlour, where the sound faded into the crackling of the dying fireplace embers. Karol stood there in the darkness, trembling, convinced that his mind was unravelling. Little did he know the events were only beginning to escalate. Over the next few weeks, Karol's daughter Anna developed an odd habit. Magda mentioned it one morning with a nervous chuckle. Anna has been setting an extra place at her little tea table for a make-believe friend. Karol frowned. Anna had always been an imaginative child, but something about this unsettled him. He gently asked Anna who she was playing with. The little girl gave her father a solemn look and said, "Her name is Miri." The answer sent a chill racing up Karol's spine. Miriam Goldman had been the name of the murdered neighbour's daughter, a name Anna had never been told. When he pressed gently, asking what Miri looked like, Anna shrugged. "She's my size," she whispered, "and she's sad. She likes when I play the music box." That evening, Karol crept into Anna's room after she'd fallen asleep. In the faint moonlight, he saw the music box on the bedside, lid open. It wasn't playing, but as he reached down to close it, the lid suddenly snapped shut on its own, nearly catching his fingers. Karol recoiled. The box's crank began to turn by itself, emitting a single plinking note. One slow note at a time, as if someone were deliberately teasing out the tune. Karol's breath caught in his throat. He grabbed the box with trembling hands and, struggling to keep calm, carried it out to the shed behind the house. There, he wrapped it in rags and stuffed it inside an old tin milk can, sealing the lid tight. He could hardly believe what he was doing, hiding a music box as if it were dangerous. But every instinct told him something was deeply wrong with that object. Perhaps getting rid of it would break whatever spell hung over his family. For a brief period, peace returned to the Wozniak household. The strange sounds stopped. Anna seemed to forget about her invisible friend Miri and went back to playing with her cousins and real friends. Karol allowed himself to hope that his nightmare was over. Spring of 1947 arrived, and with it a sense of renewal. Magda even remarked that Karol looked like his old self again as he tended the garden, the lines under his eyes softening. The music box remained entombed in the milk can, out of sight and mind. Karol considered burying it or throwing it in the river, but an irrational dread stopped him. What if destroying it angered whatever force clung to it? Instead, he planned to slip away one night and return the box to the ruins of the Goldmans' cottage, hoping that laying it back to rest would calm the restless dead. But fate had other plans. In late May 1947, a sudden illness swept through little Anna. What started as a common fever spiraled rapidly into something far more alarming. Anna began screaming in the middle of the night, thrashing as if she were fighting off unseen hands. Her fever spiked dangerously. She rambled deliriously about a dark room and not letting go. At times she gasped for air, as though invisible water was filling her lungs. Magda and Karol were terrified and baffled. The local doctor could find no cause beyond a fever, no infection to treat. One dawn, after an especially brutal night of watching their daughter suffer, Karol stepped out to the yard for air. The sunrise was a dull glow over the trees. He noticed something that made his heart drop. The old tin milk can in the shed was on its side, lid off. The rags were strewn about, and the music box was gone. Karol's mind raced. Had someone broken in and stolen it? That made little sense. A thief would go for food or tools, not an old music box hidden away. Frantically, he searched the shed and the yard. Finally, he saw it. The wooden box sitting neatly on the back step of the house. It was upright, lid closed, almost as if placed there deliberately. With trembling hands, Karol picked it up. The wood felt unnaturally cold. A splinter of dread pierced his heart. While they'd been distracted with Anna's illness, the thing had crept back. As he turned it over, he noticed something new scratched into the wood on the bottom of the box. Letters jaggedly gouged as if by a nail or claw. In the weak light, Karol spelled it out. Mama. He nearly dropped the box. That word sent him reeling into a memory. When the Goldmans were being marched away, little Miriam had cried out desperately for her mother. Karol had stood frozen behind his curtain as the family was taken, and that one word, Mama, had seared into his soul. Now it was carved into the music box that once belonged to her. The message was clear. The past had not forgotten him. Karol spun around at the sound. The back door, which he'd left ajar, was now closed. Inside the house, Anna's screams suddenly stopped. An awful silence fell. Karol rushed indoors, calling for Magda and Anna. He found his wife sobbing in relief, cradling a groggy, sweating Anna. The fever had broken in that very instant. Anna looked up at her father and managed a weak smile. Karol's heart swelled with relief as he embraced them both. Perhaps the worst was over, but in Karol's hand, the music box felt heavier than before. He could swear a faint warmth now pulsed from it, like a heartbeat. He knew then that there would be a price for Anna's recovery. That evening, after Anna finally fell into a peaceful sleep, Karol sat at the kitchen table across from Magda. He knew he could hide the truth no longer. Under the single flickering lantern, Karol confessed everything to his wife. The Goldman's fate, the looting, the cursed music box, the ghostly happenings he'd been experiencing. Magda listened with widening eyes and a hand over her mouth. Shame burned in Karol's cheeks as he recounted how he'd coveted their neighbors' belongings at their most helpless moment. Tears welled as he admitted he feared the Goldman's spirits were seeking retribution. Magda, pale but resolute, reached across and gripped his hands. She urged him to do what his heart already knew was right, return the music box to where it belonged. "Lay their memory to rest, Karol," she whispered. "Maybe then they'll forgive us." They decided to go that night, under cover of darkness. The ruins of the Goldman's cottage stood at the edge of the village, blackened timbers still jutting from the crumbled stone foundation, a mute memorial to the tragedy. It was a moonless night when Karol and Magda approached the site. Crickets chirped in the tall grass that had overtaken the yard. Karol's lantern cast long, skittering shadows. Together, they entered what had once been the Goldman's parlor. Karol's footfalls echoed on the remaining flagstones. With a deep breath, he placed the music box on a half-collapsed windowsill, the same one where Miriam's mother used to set flower vases in better times. He murmured a shaky apology into the emptiness, voice cracking. "I'm sorry, so sorry for what I did. Please, find peace." Beside him, Magda quietly wept, whispering a prayer for the dead. They stood in silence for a moment, expecting something, but there was only the rustle of leaves and the distant call of an owl. The air felt still, lighter even. Karol took Magda's hand and they turned to leave. As they stepped out of the cottage ruins, the lantern suddenly guttered out, plunging them into darkness. Magda squeezed Karol's hand in alarm. Before Karol could react, a sound froze them in their tracks. The delicate, unmistakable chiming of the music box, playing on its own from inside the ruins. The lullaby drifted out toward them, each note deliberate and mocking. It played all the way through to the end this time, a gentle tune that felt warped by the dread of the moment. Karol, voice trembling, called out into the night, "Please, let us be." The music stopped on the very last note, hanging in the air. In the silence, a new sound emerged. It was as though a child was slowly walking toward the doorway of the ruined home. Magda pulled Karol's arm, terror in her eyes. "We need to go," she hissed under her breath. Fear overwhelmed him and he yielded. They backed away, then turned and hurried home, not daring to look behind. As they left, Karol thought he heard a faint whisper carry on the breeze, a single word, "Papa." He would never be sure if it was real or just the guilt in his mind giving the night voice. For a few months, life seemed to return to normal, or as normal as could be. Summer 1947 passed without incident. The music box stayed at the ruins. Karol avoided that edge of town entirely. He even started sleeping soundly again, believing perhaps the simple act of returning the stolen item had appeased the spirits. Anna regained her health and laughter. The terror of spring became an uneasy memory that Karol and Magda spoke of only in hushed tones, if at all. But curses, if that's truly what this was, do not lift so easily. In late September, as the leaves turned gold and orange, a travelling merchant came through Ruecznika. With him, on the back of a wagon, Karol spotted a peculiar sight. A handcrafted wooden doll with glass eyes and a painted smile, sitting among the merchant's wares. It bore an uncanny resemblance to the doll Karol remembered seeing on the Goldman's floor the day they looted the cottage. The merchant noticed Karol staring. "Ah, you have a good eye," the old man said. This doll came from an estate sale in a nearby town, belonged to a family that perished in the war. Such items carry history, you know. He winked as if sharing a secret. Karol's mouth went dry. He bought the doll on the spot with nearly all the money in his pocket, much to the merchant's surprise. Magda was puzzled by his urgency, but he offered no explanation. That night, after Anna was asleep, Karol crept out and made his way one last time to the Goldman cottage ruins. In one arm he carried the doll, in his free hand a shovel and lantern. He felt now what he realized had been growing inside him for years. Remorse had turned to an unbearable need for atonement. Karol knelt in what used to be the Goldmans' living room and gently placed the doll next to the music box, which still sat on the windowsill coated in dust. By lantern light, he began to dig in the soft earth of the cottage floor, determined to bury these precious items properly, as one might lay to rest the remains of a loved one. His tears mingled with the rain as he dug, and he whispered fragments of a prayer, begging forgiveness from the ghosts of Miriam and her parents. It was past midnight when Karol finished digging a small pit. He placed the doll and music box inside, covering them with dirt, returning them to the earth. Exhausted, he sat back on his heels, chest heaving with sobs that he no longer had the strength to suppress. "It's done. It's done," he mumbled to himself, unsure if he was speaking to the dead or to his own conscience. At that moment, the lantern flame flickered and died, leaving Karol in utter darkness. He fumbled in his coat for a match, when suddenly a lantern on the far side of the room flared to life, on its own. A cold blue flame danced within the glass. By its unearthly light, Karol saw them. 3 figures standing just at the edge of the pit he'd dug. A man, a woman, and a little girl holding the woman's hand. Their features were in shadow, but Karol knew at once who they were. The little girl stepped forward, tilting her head in an almost curious way. In the silence, Karol heard her speak clearly, in a voice that sounded like it echoed from the bottom of a well. "Why, Karol?" The single question hung in the air. Tears streamed down Karol's face. He had no answer, at least none that could undo what was done. I'm sorry," he choked out. "I'm so sorry. I was afraid. I didn't know. Please forgive me." The trio of spectres stood unmoving. The little girl's glassy eyes seemed to study him in that ghastly blue light. The silence stretched painfully. Then the woman, Mrs. Goldman, took a step forward, her phantom face contorted not in anger, but in sorrow. She slowly shook her head. In her arms, she held something that hadn't been there before, an infant swaddled in a blanket. Karol's mind reeled. The Goldmans only had one child, didn't they? As if reading his thoughts, the woman's mournful eyes met his. And in that impossible moment, Karol realized the horrifying truth that had been buried by gossip and time. Miriam hadn't been the only child. Mrs. Goldman had been pregnant when they were killed. She was due in a month. In the chaos of war, Karol had never heard or never cared to ask. This innocent life was snuffed out before it even began. The phantom mother's face crumpled in silent grief as she looked at the tiny bundle. An overwhelming wave of shame and despair crashed over Karol. All this time, he thought the spirits sought revenge for what he stole. But now he understood. The cursed item had never been about the loot. It was about remembrance of lives unjustly taken. Every tune of the music box, every ghostly whisper, was the Goldman family crying out not to be forgotten, asking someone, anyone, why this happened to them. Karol, shaking, reached out a hand toward the ghosts, trying to offer something, anything. "I will never forget you. Never. I will tell everyone your story. I will." His voice broke. The little girl, Miriam, slowly released her mother's hand and took a step toward Karol. Up close, her face was finally visible. Her skin was ashen, her eyes cloudy with tears, yet she gave Karol a small, sad smile. She then knelt and placed a tiny object on the ground in front of him, Karol's own silver crucifix necklace, which he hadn't even realized was no longer around his neck. In a soft voice that echoed in his mind, Miriam said, "For your daughter." Karol stared in disbelief at the crucifix. It was the one his grandmother had given him, his most treasured heirloom. How did she? Before he could react, a sudden gust of wind howled through the room. Karol shut his eyes against dust and debris. When he opened them a heartbeat later, the blue lantern was out, and the Goldmans were gone. Only darkness and the sounds of the storm remained. The crucifix lay at his feet, gleaming faintly in a stray moonbeam. The pit where he'd buried the items was now filled in, as if untouched. When Karol did not return home by morning, Magda became frantic. She gathered 2 neighbors and went to search the old Goldman place. There, at the edge of the ruined cottage, they found Karol. He was lying face up in the mud, stone dead, with a serene expression and a tear dried on his cheek. Oddly, his hands were folded on his chest, as though in peaceful repose rather than panic. Next to him in the earth was his silver crucifix, and beside it a small bundle of cloth. Inside that bundle, clutched to his body, was the old music box and a charred doll, entwined together. It looked like Karol had dug them up again before he died, as if unwilling to let go after all. Magda collapsed in grief and confusion. The doctor could only conclude Karol's heart gave out, perhaps from strain. But those who had known Karol saw the transformation in him in his final days. He had been a man haunted, then suddenly a man at peace. Word spread quickly through Ruecznika of the strange tableau of Karol's death. Villagers murmured that his face, while calm, had an uncanny resemblance to relief, as if whatever burden he carried had finally lifted at the moment of his passing. Some swore there were footprints in the mud around Karol's body that did not match his boots. The small bare footprints of a child leading into the ruins, though none leading out. But by the time anyone thought to verify, a heavy rain had washed the evidence away. In the weeks that followed, Magda honoured her husband's last plea, though he never voiced it aloud. She intuited it in her heart. She began to speak openly about the Goldman family and what had happened to them. In the village square, she put up a modest memorial, a plaque with their names and the simple inscription, "Never forgotten." The cursed music box and the doll were eventually reburied in the ruins, this time by the town's priest with proper rites and left undisturbed. Anna, who recovered fully, kept her father's crucifix. She would wear it all her life, passing it down as a symbol of protection. To this day, Ruecznika locals maintain that the old Goldman cottage is quiet now. There are no more whispers in the night, no eerie lullabies on the wind. Some nights, though, especially around the anniversary of Karol's death in October, a faint scent of roses, Mrs. Goldman's favourite flower, wafts through the village. Those with keen ears claim that if you listen closely by the ruins, you might hear the soft giggle of a little girl, followed by the deep, warm laugh of a father. Sounds not of suffering, but of a family at peace at last. Whether these are mere stories or something more, one lesson in Ruecznika endures. The atrocities of war leave deep wounds, some seen, some unseen. And perhaps, just perhaps, restless souls will find ways to remind the living of debts unpaid and memories that should not be buried. Karol Wozniak's tale, The Cursed Music Box, and the tragedy of the Goldman family have become inseparable in local lore, a chilling parable of guilt, redemption, and the restless dead. In the end, was it truly a curse that claimed Karol's life? Or was it the unbearable weight of remorse that finally broke him? The story holds a bit of both, forever blurring the line between the supernatural and the psychological. What remains is the haunting truth that the past never really lets go, until it is acknowledged. Even today, the story of Karol Wozniak and the cursed music box lingers in Ruecznika like a shadow that won't fade. Whether it was a vengeful haunting or the unbearable weight of guilt, one truth remains. Some relics of war refuse to be forgotten. And sometimes the past doesn't rest until it takes something or someone in return.
Every story has an end, but here, the mysteries never stop. Thank you for watching and being a part of this journey into the unknown. Your support keeps these stories alive, and there's plenty more waiting for you. We drop 3 new stories every week, so if you crave suspense, the unexplained, and the downright chilling, make sure you're subscribed and ready for what's next. Until then, keep your lights on, your doors locked, and remember, some stories stay with you long after they're told.